Hello! It's been a while since we had some short stories. This time, though, I have a slightly different idea in mind. There's a few long stories I'd like to bring attention to, but at this point I don't have time to read the whole thing. So here there's a couple of first chapters I'm going to read for you of stories that I really want all of you to go read because they're just so awesome. So the first one coming up has been a long time coming. I told this person I'd read their story like ages ago, and I've just pushed it back and things got in the way. But this is the first chapter of No Rain by Digi Wears Goggles. This story is just so awesome. The characterization is just so amazing and well written. It really captures the emotions and feelings and baggage that come with a post-genocide pacifist run, which is where this is set. So here's the first chapter of that story, which is called Life is Pretty Plain. You are so tired. Sweat drips from your skull in streams, gathers in pools at your collarbone, dries in a salted gum to your teeth. It's disgusting, an absurd magical function. The puffs of hot breath in your ribcage are equally insulting, gasps of air doing little to ward off the telltale rattle of your knees. Papyrus had been right. You should have been working out after all. You think of your brother. It fills you with determination. Yeah, right. The thought draws a wheezing, bitter laugh from you. It nearly knocks you off your slippered feet, but it keeps you awake, so there's also that. You shake your head, fix flickering pinpoints on your opponent and the knife in their hand. You will not fall asleep, you cannot, because you know what happens if you do. You've been here before, you both have. The two of you are trapped in this endless, stupid dance with your rapt audience of stained glass and silence. You will not forget, but that doesn't really matter, does it? They have not stopped smiling, but neither have you this time around, so at least you'll tie in something. Barely a tick on the scoreboard, but then again you've managed to kill them 10 times. Or was it 12? Or 15? So you guess that's fair. You let out a long, shaky breath. Hey, you mumble. Are you just some kind of sick freak or something? How many times has it been now? I'm all out of speeches. It's not like there's anything new here. Or are you just feeling bonely? They don't even blink through the dust coating their face. Your ribs shudder from the effort your laughter takes from you. Fair enough. Guess I'm getting lazy. You try to shrug, but your shoulders are as heavy as the mountain hanging above your head, entombing you both. You are so tired. You'd say death is preferable, but you've been stabbed enough times to know that's not true. The room spins. Your breathing slows. Your eyes flicker and fall shut. The world spins as you feel the insistent tug of the floor, pulling you down. Down. The movement is subtle, a knife cutting through the air. You jump back anyway, bones acting on reflex learned only after countless burns. The game, the dance, is on again. The world is back in focus. That stupid music looping back into infinity. Was it their music or yours? You don't even know anymore, as your bones provide the percussion. A torrential downpour of bones, lightning flashes of blue energy, the thunderclap of a small body weighted to the floor by whatever was left of their soul. You can't think anymore. You're slowing down, dragging. The mountain is so heavy, but you fight. You wheeze. Everything is too fast, too much. If you could just get a second to remember how this went the last time you miss a step. A flash of glittering red eyes. A smile where there shouldn't be one, and it's wide, too wide. Wide like your eyes and your stance. Too open. The knife hits, and with a choked gasp Sans woke in an unfamiliar bed. This would have been dramatic were it not for his sheets. which chose that particular moment to show their true colors. They tangled around his arms in some mockery of their intended purpose, had him thrashing in their grip for a good 20 seconds before he finally threw them aside. He remained upright, gulping in unnecessary air as if he'd drowned. It took several minutes for this to subside, a minute afterwards to tick off the familiar landmarks of his room. Dusty treadmill, computer, desk, sock tornado. Sunlight rudely peeked its way past his blinds, capturing dust motes in its glow and casting a stuffy haze over all it touched. Sunlight. The surface. Right. Sans let out a groan as he fell back onto the bare mattress, fighting to ignore the throbbing the motion caused. Same timeline, or at least that's what the evidence pointed to. Some good news for once. It wasn't that he always remembered. From his estimates, it was 1 in 3 resets. And even then, he had no way of knowing if that math was correct. That hypothesis was a volatile mixture of actual memory and déjà vu, alongside a pinch of guesswork and his scribbled notes. Even the idea of a hypothesis was laughable. It wasn't like the scientific method was much use in this situation. Books hadn't exactly prepared him for this. Then again, he couldn't remember the last time he'd actually bothered to check a book, so whatever. Sans let out a laugh, then grimaced as he recalled similar laughter whistling from the wound in his torso. Well, thank goodness he could still remember that. He couldn't be entirely sure where memory became his own carefully placed suggestion. Memory was a fickle thing when it came down to it. Images and feelings scrapbooked together by hastily scribbled notes in his own voice. Whether locked in his skull or on paper, the result was the same. His thoughts were always subtly stained with different hues by emotion in spite of his efforts, so the information would be warped. Eventually, time would take the memories, chewing life from them until words became meaningless and pages stuck together. Inevitably, all he'd be recalling was the echoes of the story he'd told himself to hold on to. "Whoa there, friend. You may need to slow down," he muttered to himself, scrubbing at his eye sockets with his palm. His room was uncomfortably warm, even with the box fan fighting to valiantly keep up airflow, and the sunlight wasn't helping. Outside, the cicadas droned. Seasons were a pretty great novelty, but he was finding his first, or was it 5th, experience with humidity particularly unpleasant. The heat of the hotlands mixed with the wet of waterfall, leaving everything sticky and gross. The lack of rain wasn't really helping. Sans rose with a groan, his joints popping and cracking like a drumline as he shuffled over to his desk. He squinted down at his notepad, thin fingertips brushing across tick marks. After counting in his head, he grasped for a pencil, awkwardly fumbling with it. The thing had been worn down to the point where actually using the lead was barely an option, but he didn't feel like hunting through the trash tornado for the sharpener. He scrubbed a dull, half-hearted tick mark on the lined paper, more a carving into the material than a written symbol. Day 443. Well over a year and the longest a timeline had held, if his notes were correct. Of course, he could never entirely be sure, but whatever. He strode right past his newest pair of slippers. After stumbling his way through time and space to the kitchen, Sans grasped at the coffee pot handle like a lifeline. The on switch glowed wearily up at him. Apparently, the machine was as tired as he was, given the lack of real heat from the burner. Welp, that was the real price of the clearance rack, huh? Lukewarm liquid sloshed into his waiting mug, some of it splashing onto the counter, but Sans paid the mess no heed. The added sugar mostly turned his drink into a gritty, room-temperature sludge. He sipped it anyway. Just part of the daily grind, Sans snorted to himself. That one was too lazy for even Toriel. She deserved a higher caliber of pun. The skeleton let out a sigh as he leaned back against the counter for a moment, flickering pinpricks gazing out at the rest of the apartment, or what little there was to see. A living room, a kitchen, 2 bedrooms and a bathroom, with plenty of threadbare carpet to stretch between it all. Cheap, but a reasonable price if he and Papyrus intended to get a house again. Besides, between the lumpiest second-hand couch they could find, the laundry piles and Toriel's paw-sewn curtains, the place almost felt like home. Sort of. He was just contemplating the use of some aspirin when the front door slammed open, as if the ensuing caps lock had been summoned by his very thoughts. "Brother!" Papyrus called out, posing dramatically in the entryway. "I have returned from my place of employment." Sans flashed something between a grin and a grimace, squeezing one eye shut against the sharp pain shooting through his temple. "Hey there, soldier. How go the retail trenches?" "There were many humans. I, the great Papyrus, dutifully greeted them and informed them of our ridiculously low prices," Papyrus declared as he slammed the door shut behind him, the entire apartment shaking with the action. "Some did not greet back, so I simply did as Undine suggested and greeted harder. There was a loud banging from beneath his feet, causing both skeletons to flinch. Papyrus lowered his volume as he plopped onto the threadbare carpet. "I encountered more of those strange half-children today." "Teenagers," Sans reminded him. "The word you're looking for is teenagers. You know, like the Snowdrake kids in Ice Cap, but human." Yes, between-agers," Papyrus agreed, waving long fingers dismissively. "They keep visiting me and asking if it is Halloween and I'm in costume. In fact, this is the 3rd week they have come in and asked that, even though it is still summer. I cannot understand why this is so confusing to them. I tried to get a calendar to explain this very simple concept to them, but they do not seem to get it. Why would I be in costume in August? I certainly hope Toriel is educating the new generation a little better." He unlaced his sneakers lovingly before placing them neatly on the shoe rack. His jaw then tugged into a frown as he spotted the graveyard of much smaller shoes and old slippers right next to it. "Sans, how many times have I asked you to use the shoe rack? It is there for—" More pounding beneath their feet. Both brothers flinched. "It is there for shoes." "Look, I admit I just didn't train them properly, okay?" Sans drawled as he took another sip of coffee. "You've got some good, upstanding shoes there, Paps. Civilized and made for this modern era. My shoes are wild. They just aren't meant for the city. They gotta roam free. It's in their souls." Papyrus threw an old slipper at him. It arced perfectly into the empty sink. 10 points, Sans chirped from his new place on the couch. His brother rolled his eyes as he stood, though the expression was lost as he shrugged his work polo off. "We will have to do laundry tonight. This shirt is disgusting." He grimaced as he held his shirt away from him, clad in an undershirt and khakis that seemed equally worse for wear thanks to the heat. But we just went. Come on, bro. Nobody else washes their work shirt every day." Sans groaned as he draped himself face down over the back of the couch. "Yes, but they should," Papyrus huffed as he lovingly removed his name tag. He polished it with the edge of his undershirt, then apparently deemed it satisfactory. He dropped it into a bowl alongside several keys and some loose change. "It is disrespectful to arrive at work with anything less than your best, and that absolutely includes body odor. Besides, you have enough dirty socks that we could visit Wash World every evening for a month and we'd still be buried in your filth." That's fair," Sans shrugged as he rolled over, head lolling against the back of the couch. He sipped at his coffee upside down, the liquid dutifully maintaining its place in his mug in spite of gravity. Papyrus wandered his way into the kitchen, then gave a groan. "Ugh, Sans, you can't put the empty coffee pot back on the burner. The glass will break." There was a click of a switch being flipped, followed by the rush of water. "And you could have at least rinsed it out." "Sorry, bro. Didn't even think about it," Sans called back. "I guess you could say I have a latte on my mind." Another groan. "Your jokes are more insulting than your mess." A squeak as the faucet was turned off, followed by the sound of the fridge being opened. "You did not go grocery shopping like I asked, did you?" Sans grimaced. "Whoops." Papyrus sighed, nudging one of the topmost cabinets open and pulling out a plastic, slightly battered cup. "I don't suppose you went job hunting either?" he asked, clearly trying and failing to sound casual on the subject. "Of course I did." The lie came easily enough. It was familiar now. "Online applications, bro." "It is better to go in person. It shows you take initiative. Which, granted, you do not, but you could at least pretend," Papyrus pointed out as he flicked the faucet back on and filled up the cup. He gulped the liquid down, then made a face. "Ugh, we need to get a filter like Toriel has. Undyne is right. City water tastes strange." Sans had pulled his phone from his shorts pocket and was now dutifully scrolling his way through the news. Asgore was working on a remembrance day for the fallen humans. This news article on the Undernet had significantly less views than the teaser trailer for Metaton's new reality show, though both comment sections were both equally volatile. Papyrus flopped down on the couch next to him with a sigh. He glanced over his brother appraisingly. "You have worn the same clothes for 3 days in a row now." Sans agreed as he glanced over the weather. Goody, there was no end in sight to the heat wave. "Did you just get up?" Papyrus asked suspiciously. "You don't know that," Sans replied through a slurp of coffee. "It's 4 in the afternoon, Sans. That coffee has been sitting there since I left at 6. You should not be drinking it." Slurp. "Sans!" Papyrus snatched the half-empty mug from his brother's fingers. Lukewarm sugar and coffee sludge shakily floated in the air for a moment, but fortunately Papyrus righted the mug just in time. "Whoa there, buddy. That was a risky move for somebody who's so worried about our security deposit," Sans chirped from behind the nearby closed bathroom door. Papyrus let out a frustrated groan. "Ugh, you're impossible!" Sans heard some shuffling, followed by the sound of running water. He couldn't help but chuckle. Papyrus couldn't leave a mess for more than a minute if he tried. He took a moment to observe himself in the mirror, his usual grin fading. His eye sockets were sinking into the bone, heavy from lack of sleep, and the pinpricks of light in his eyes flickered. Okay, so maybe going to bed at 4 a.m. hadn't been the best choice. He was finding it harder and harder to convince himself to sleep. If he slept, the next day would come. Well, he had no way of knowing if that next day would be here or somewhere farther back. Which was stupid, of course, because tomorrow would come regardless of how late he stayed up playing Sentry for it with the internet and some shitty memes for company. Still, it was better than the dreams, so he'd take it. A minute later had Sans popping into his usual seat on the kitchen countertop. He plucked his now clean mug from the dish rack beside him and dutifully began drying it. "So," he spoke over the roar of the faucet, "what are we going to do about dinner?" "Not Grillby's," Papyrus sighed, as he took the now dry mug without missing a beat and returned it to one of the higher shelves in the cabinet. "Lame," Sans drawled, as he scrubbed at a newly cleaned cereal bowl. The two worked in companionable silence for a while, the only noise coming from the clink of dishware, the running water, and Papyrus's cheerful hum. It was a scene that could have fit anywhere, a constant that seemed comforting but for how easily Sans knew it could be torn away. He tried not to think about it, focusing instead on the rush of water and his brother's hum, occasionally providing a backup tap on the countertop for a beat. "Toriel's?" Sans suggested as he polished the last bowl. "We could pick up some groceries on the way. I'm sure she'd appreciate it." His brother nodded as he turned the faucet off. "Yes, but you are not leaving this house until you change your shirt. And no hoodie either. It's too hot for that." "Aw, don't be so clothes-minded." Papyrus flung water droplets at the spot where Sans had been. Toriel's house was exactly what one would expect. It was a modest thing the group had all chipped in on in spite of the boss monster's protests. She had only relented when reminded of how much better it would be for Frisk to have a permanent roof over their head instead of a crummy apartment. Of course, with the house being the last stop on Undyne and Papyrus's morning runs, Sans' frequent visits for tea and pun exchanges, and Alphys's weekly, or even sometimes daily, anime viewings, it was rare that Toriel and Frisk were really alone. It was important for family to stick together, so there was no better place than Mom's. Sans smiled at the thought as he sunk back into an overstuffed armchair. A summer breeze mercifully rustled its way past paw-sewn curtains, past the whirring ceiling fan and out through another open window. Unlike the apartment, Toriel's house had decent airflow, so the heat was at least bearable here. Flowers bloomed from vases on every available table space, bouquets of expertly trimmed golden petals from Asgore mixed with daisies and wildflowers that had been plucked from roadsides by tiny fingers. Framed photos and albums joined them, memories of beach day outings, birthdays, their first Christmas. Okay, not really the first, but Sans pushed that thought away with a grimace. He sighed and adjusted the strings on his hoodie, falling back again. "I can't believe you're wearing that," Undyne groaned from below. She was sprawled out on the wood floor, clad only in loose shorts and a tank top. Her loose red hair was spread out above her head, gills wheezing. "How are you not dying?" "What is dead may never die," Sans chirped, then grinned knowingly as Alphys beamed at the reference. He'd seen enough Undernet posts to know she and Undyne had been really into Game of Thrones lately. "You are the least Ironborn person I know," the fish woman grumbled, though her tone softened somewhat as Alphys ran claws gently through her hair. Babe, no fair. I'm trying to be cranky here." "I know. We should really convince Her Majesty to get an air conditioner," Alphys sighed. "She'd never do it," Undyne sighed. "Too practical. The humans say it's hot. What, 1 week out of the year? I don't know. I kind of like this." Sans piped up after a moment of silence, picking his head up to grin down at the girls. "I'm finally fashionable." Undyne's brow furrowed in confusion, which made Sans grin wider. "Everybody's wearing sweatpants." Undyne snorted. Alphys groaned. "You are the worst, Sans!" Papyrus howled from the kitchen over Toriel's tittering laughter and Frisk's giggles. "I know," Sans called back. If his laughter seemed a little hollow, nobody noticed. Sans simply laid there for a while, listening to Undyne and Alphys's lazy chatter as pots and pans clanged in the kitchen. Toriel was proving to be a better cooking teacher than Undyne, but her patience still did little to taper his brother's enthusiasm. From what he could gather, the two of them and the kid were in the process of making some kind of quiche. Or at least that seemed to be the idea, but he could hear Toriel tutting over the ingredients. "If I'd known you were going to pick up groceries, I would have asked you to get more eggs." "Do we not have enough?" Papyrus gasped. "Never fear, I, the great Papyrus, will run to my store and get some. We have a sale going on where you can get 2 for the low price of $1.69. They come from free-range chickens. which I suspect is far better than regular range chickens. I'm not actually certain what the difference is." No, that is all right," Toriel hummed. "We have just enough, although I appreciate you telling me about the sale. We'll simply have to go grocery shopping tomorrow. Frisk, dear, could you help me measure out the flour?" There was silence for a moment, then Toriel laughed and Papyrus let out a long, suffering sigh. Sans could only assume Frisk had signed some sort of pun and grinned. It took some real skill to manage puns with sign language. He couldn't be more proud. Sans let out a sigh, letting his eye sockets fall shut. A familiar heaviness overtook him as he took in the scent of flowers and clean linen, let the words wash over him in a haze of white noise and anchor his heavy bones to the chair. It was impossible to shake the idea that this could be gone at any moment, but the familiarity of it meant he could pretend. He was so tired. There was a wet splat from the kitchen, followed by a few more. "Oh," Toriel gasped. "Looks like I spoke too soon on those eggs." "Do not worry, I have prepared for this moment," Papyrus boomed, his voice growing louder as he darted for the front door. "I will be to the store and back faster than you can say quesh." "It's pronounced quiche, man," Undyne deadpanned from the floor. Sans' eyes remained closed as the chaos washed over him, breathing slowly as he caught Toriel's gentle reassurances. "Don't worry about it, Frisk dear. Let's get a washcloth so we can clean this." The world stuttered. Sans bucked upright from the armchair with a jolt, eyes flickering into focus. "If I'd known you were going to pick up groceries, I would have asked you to get more eggs." Toriel's voice echoed from the kitchen. Sans choked on his own gasping breath, clasping at his chest with bony fingers. You okay, dude?" Undyne asked from the floor, brow furrowing in concern. She then flashed a sly smile. "What, you have a nightmare over getting less than 12 hours of beauty sleep?" Sans gave a hollow laugh, grasping at the arms of the chair like a lifeline. Yeah. He rose on shaky feet, bare bones clattering against the wood floor as he stumbled toward the kitchen. Another reset. Over eggs. What the hell? "Oh, is old Lazy Bones here to help?" Papyrus exclaimed as Sans sauntered in. "No way, bro. You know what they say about too many cooks," Sans drawled as he glanced around. His eyelights finally settled on the blue and magenta striped tank top. The skeleton reached down to rustle a mop of unruly brown hair, causing his victim to let out a squeak and bat his hands away. Frisk spun around and pouted up at him. "You causing trouble in here, kiddo?" Sans asked, raising a brow meaningfully. The child's expression faltered slightly before they flashed a somewhat guilty smile and shrugged. "Oh, Sans, you know Frisk never causes any trouble," Toriel laughed. "Perhaps a bit of mischief, but they're a good child." Sans stared at the kid for a moment, then sighed and patted Frisk's head again, perhaps a little hard. "Course not. What am I saying? Nothing worth breaking a few eggs over, right?" He brushed past them to the fridge practically wallpapered with crayon drawings, then opened it. It wasn't worth getting worked up over. Of course the kid who saved the whole underground just by hugging it would want to avoid something as simple as messing up dinner for everybody. Stupid, but understandable, assuming this was still the kid and not somebody else. He tried to ignore the way his fingers shook as he reached for one of the ketchup bottles Toriel always kept on hand for him. He was just popping off the lid when he heard Toriel gasp again, heard the puff of air of the bag of flour dropping to the floor and the splat of eggs once more. Damn it. Instantly, they were all reduced to coughing and hacking, arms waving every which way in an effort to dissipate the cloud that had fallen over the kitchen. The skeleton coughed and turned back to face the chaos. "Whoa there, Tori. You..." White dust nearly obscuring blue and magenta stripes, gathering on top of hair like snow. Hands covered in white, so much white. A knife clenched in a fist. His hand shot out on reflex, fingertips flung outward. 6 blasters were summoned in a burst of blue flame and the roar of a jet engine, light pooling in their mouths like stars. Bones clattered from everywhere and nowhere, a cacophony of sound and sharp edges, poised and ready. Cabinet doors flung open from the force of it all. The pie dish hit the floor with an explosion of glass. A pair of eyes blinked back at him, wide open for the first time in ages and absolutely terrified. Dark brown, no red. Sans froze. Nobody breathed. The bones hung in the air. Blasters wheezed as if alive. His eye burned. Papyrus's jaw had dropped. Toriel clutched at her chest. Undyne poised at the kitchen doorway, glowing spear in hand, her eye wide. Frisk let out a hiccuping gasp. Bones clattered to the floor in a rain, Sans' arm dropping to his side. The blasters vanished in an instant. Undyne was on him in seconds, strong arms joining Papyrus's hands on his shoulders as they both pulled him back. Toriel had flung herself between him and Frisk, gathering her child in her grasp. Moments later, Alphys was running from the living room, eyes wide. There was a lot of yelling. "Frisk! Frisk, are you all right?" Toriel cried. Her paws went over every possible inch of Frisk's body, checking for injuries. "What the fuck, dude?" Undyne snarled where his ear would be, her grip so hard on his shoulder his bones creaked. "Undyne, be careful, he's not... Sans, what was that about? Sans!" "What happened? What was that noise? Why is everyone yelling? What happened?" Alphys cried out. Sans just stared. His eyes were completely blank, stuck on the space where Frisk would have been. He was shielded from their expression by Toriel's back. No. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. He couldn't. Sans took a shaky breath, his entire body rattling. His jaw jerked its way into some semblance of a smile, sweat beading on his forehead. "Whoops, looks like dinner's ruined. Sorry about that. Well, you know what they say, omelets, eggs. You guys were making omelets, right? Something like that." He tried to move, but Undyne's hand remained on his shoulder, holding him steady. "Look, no worries. I'll just pop down to the store and grab some more. I know a shortcut." Papyrus stepped in front of him, put both hands on his shoulders, met his gaze with a frown. "Sans, don't you dare—" "Back in a jiff," Sans chirped, and in a flash of blue light, he was gone. And that was Chapter 1 of No Rain. There are currently 8 chapters out for this total, so if you're interested in reading more, just check out the link I've got in the description. Like I said, it's really a great story with some awesome characterization. If there's one thing I really love in a story, it's great character moments. Speaking of that, the next 1-chapter preview I'll be wearing is for a short series by Deet Doot Diz, whose works I've read before, or work anyway, called Hospital. The premise for this is pretty self-explanatory. It starts off a little bit dramatic, but in future chapters it leads to some wonderful little moments, so I will set the scene for you. Chapter 1, in which Papyrus is late. "Stupid weatherman. You have one job and you manage to be this bad at it?" Sans grumbled sourly, glaring up at the overcast sky. The forecast had said the clouds would clear up by nightfall, and he had been looking forward to a night of stargazing with his telescope. He stood in the backyard beside the equipment in question, letting out a sigh of defeat. Everything had been set up just in case the wind managed to blow the clouds away. The telescope was adjusted and angled just right, and his new astronomy book was open on the grass near his feet, turned to a page of constellations that should be visible tonight. He had been waiting for quite some time, though, and it was obvious now that he would be seeing no stars tonight. "Welp, might as well pack it up," he muttered. The breeze picked up enough to rustle loudly through the tree in their yard, several pages of his book flipping over. He closed the book and tucked it under his arm, hoisting the telescope up over his shoulder. The trek back into the house and up the stairs with such a cumbersome load did not sound appealing. Not with his mood as dampened as it was now, anyway. Instead, he simply closed his eyes and vanished from the expanse of the backyard. An instant later, he was upstairs in his bedroom, letting out another disappointed sigh as he set down the heavy telescope against the wall. What a fucking waste. He was really annoyed, especially because if he'd known it was going to be another cloudy night, he would have just slept on the couch while Papyrus cooked dinner or something. That thought diverted his grumpy mood, realizing Papyrus had never come to find him when he got home from work. He must have gotten started cooking right away. Well, might as well go see what he's planning for tonight. With that, Sans opened his bedroom door and shuffled downstairs. "Bro, you home?" He was answered with complete silence through the house. That's weird. Thought he'd be here by now. Sans paused in the living room, fingers drumming on the back of the couch, trying to quell the odd unease he felt building in his stomach. He rounded the corner into the kitchen to look back at the clock above the stove and stopped abruptly. "What the hell? It's this late already?" He balked, reading the display that told him it was nearly 10:30. Papyrus never came home later than 8 o'clock, and even that was rare. How had he lost track of time so badly? He supposed he had just been so distracted with his telescope and waiting out the weather that he didn't realize how much time had passed, especially since he had never been interrupted by his brother's return. Sans felt a spike of concern shooting through him. Old, familiar fear. That sick feeling he'd suffered through countless times when one of the kids' runs was going the worst possible way. It had been years since the last reset, and Sans hadn't felt this way in a very long time. "Where is my brother?" His hands flew to the pockets of his hoodie, which were empty. He growled, "Where the fuck is my phone?" Racing back up the stairs, he simultaneously forced himself through the breathing exercises he had learned to help keep calm after a bad dream or panic attack brought on by some moment of déjà vu. Chill out. He probably had to work late or something. Could be anything. Calm down. He's fine. Calm down. He burst back into his bedroom, eyes scanning the usual mess, finding his forgotten cell phone on the bed among the heap of blankets. Snatching it up, he turned the screen on. A flash of relief washed through him, but was just as quickly masked by more panic. He had a missed text from Papyrus. "Coolest bro. I'm leaving work now. It's been another successful day for the great Papyrus, and I cannot wait to tell you about it." Sans felt the sickness of worry building. The text was sent almost 4 hours ago. Papyrus should have been on time to get home by 8, just like any other night. His fingers tapped quickly on the screen to open the list of contacts, preparing to call Papyrus's phone. Just then, the phone rang in his hand, the sound startling him so badly he nearly dropped the device. Oh, thank God, it was Papyrus. Sans exhaled in a rush and was already forcing himself to better composure, so as not to alert his brother to the state of panic he had worked himself up into. "Hey, bro," he answered, his voice sounding strained. "You plan on making me cook for myself tonight, or what?" He tried to lighten up his own mood, leaning against his desk as he spoke, stuffing his free hand into his pocket to stop its shaking. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line.
"Good evening. Am I speaking with Sans?"
Came a slightly hesitant voice. Definitely a man, and definitely not Papyrus. Sans was frozen, wild confusion on his face. He pulled the phone away to glance at the display again, just to verify it had actually been Papyrus's phone that was calling him. It was. Yeah? Who are you?" The man on the other end of the line cleared his throat.
Good evening, Sans. My name is Mike. I am an EMT with Liberty Hospital."
Sans felt his body go numb.
"There's been a car accident. I'm calling from an ambulance."
Nausea swirled, Sans' breathing becoming shallow and fast as he listened through ears ringing with too high panic. He could barely keep his grip on the phone and leaned heavily on the desk for support.
"We have Papyrus with us and are rushing him to Liberty Hospital right now. Your number was his most recent contact. Are you—"
"Is he okay?" Sans blurted out, cutting the man off. Another pause.
"It's difficult to be certain yet. He's unconscious, but he'll be rushed straight into the emergency room when we arrive at the hospital."
"I'll meet you there. You keep him alive. You hear me?" The warning was shot out in a dark tone through Sans' clenched teeth before he hung up. Stuffing the phone into his pocket, he zipped around his room, cramming his feet into his only pair of shoes. His thoughts were all over the place. A car accident? Papyrus was unconscious. He had no idea how hurt he was beyond that. Sans clutched his shirt over his chest, struggling in vain to keep himself from falling apart completely. He hurried down the stairs again, muttering out loud non-stop. "Gotta get to the hospital. Liberty, right. Liberty Hospital. It occurred to him that he had no idea where the hospital was. He pulled his phone back out, absently wiping a shaking hand across his eyes, realizing there were already tears spilling down his cheekbones. He stopped pacing long enough to do a quick search for the address of the hospital on his phone, at least having enough of his senses left to solve his current problem. If he didn't know where he was going at all, he couldn't teleport there. He at least needed a general idea. The results came up, and he checked the address and the location on the map. Got it. "I'm coming, Papyrus," he whispered, gripping his phone tightly and suddenly vanishing. The initial moment of awareness brought only blank thoughts and numb senses. Papyrus was merely conscious, but not yet conscious of anything. His mind was completely disconnected from anything, as if he were floating through a thick fog. Finally, he was able to structure enough of a dim thought to realize that he was completely confused. Seconds ticked by, and Papyrus's mind functioned sluggishly. Why was it so dark? He couldn't tell if his eyes were closed. Where was he? He couldn't immediately recall when he had fallen asleep, or where. He could tell this wasn't his race car bed at home. He became vaguely aware of an odd stillness around him. This feeling spurred on his confusion, and with his confusion he began to feel nervous. And then he tried to move for the first time. The instant he shifted, ever so slightly, all of his confusion was replaced with pain. It was a degree of agony so shocking and abrupt that he heard himself let out a sound somewhere between a whimper and a cry. Under normal circumstances, he would have cringed at what an uncool noise it was, but right now he couldn't spare it a thought. He heard a flurry of movement around him, and finally managed to force his eyes open. He couldn't think. There was still pain, blocking out all beyond wild confusion and now panic. Why did he hurt like this? What was going on? He suddenly felt his hand grasped in someone's grip, but he couldn't see who it was. The room itself was very dimly lit, and he was already drifting off again, hearing his own tearful whimpers as though he were not in control of his own voice. Papyrus. He wanted to speak, to ask what was happening to him. Can you hear me? His focus was fading already, and he couldn't summon the will to respond at all. His eyes slid closed again as he fell back into the restless abyss of sleep. Sans stared hard at his brother, clutching his hand and willing him to return the grip. "Bro?" Silence filled the room as he waited for a response, for anything. Nothing happened. He bent his head forward, holding Papyrus's hand to his forehead, almost in a gesture of prayer. "Come on, cool guy. I had you there for a second." He could feel tears welling in his eyes, and he didn't care that there were nurses in the room right now seeing it. It had been 3 days since he had received the call. 3 days since he had shown up at the hospital even before the ambulance had arrived. 3 days of waiting, and this was the first sign of Papyrus waking up. Sans had been devastated at the sight of his brother at first, having not been prepared for the extent of his injuries. From the moment the medical staff had assigned a room to Papyrus and brought him from the emergency room, Sans had not gone anywhere else. He swore he would be right here for whenever the moment came that his brother woke up. "What happened? Why isn't he awake yet? Have you guys really done everything you can do here?" Sans asked the nurse that had come into the room when Papyrus had started to wake up. His voice was not kind, affected greatly by his worry and the enormous disappointment of his brother waking up for all of 4 seconds, only to pass out again right away. Somewhere in him, he knew he was being more rude than he should be, and that if circumstances were different, Papyrus would scold him for such horrible manners. The nurse looked at him sympathetically. Despite Sans' abrasive tone, she didn't take it personally. She dealt with emotional family members on a daily basis. "I know this is difficult. I promise you everyone here is doing all we can to help your brother." She paused and glanced over at Papyrus for a moment, then looked at Sans again with a gentle expression. Consider it a good sign that he came around just now, even though it was brief. Sans stared up at her for a moment, then let out a sigh and turned back to Papyrus. "Yeah." He couldn't deny she was right, but it still wasn't good enough to make him feel relieved. He leaned over to lay his head on the edge of the bed, pillowing it on his free arm that wasn't stretched out holding onto Papyrus's hand. The nurse cleared her throat quietly. "You know, you're good to go down to the cafeteria and get something to eat. Or maybe it would be a good idea for you to try getting some sleep? If you want to go home for the night, I can let the head nurse of the night shift know to call you if he wakes up." Sans was already shaking his head before she finished speaking, still laying a hand on his arm and staring sleepily at his brother. He knew she was just trying to be considerate. "Nah, thanks, but I can't do that. I gotta be here. Sans paused, swallowing. "He'd do the same. If it were me." All right, I understand. Just press the call button if you need anything," she said in the same kind tone before leaving the room. Once he was alone again, the sheer exhaustion that weighed on him allowed his motions to creep up again. Papyrus had sounded so hurt in that moment he was awake. He sounded so scared. Sans couldn't remember hearing a cry like that since Papyrus had been a little kid. It was killing him that there was nothing he could do but sit here and wait. "Hey, bro," he said softly, idly rubbing his thumb over Papyrus's knuckles. "You're gonna be fine, okay? I know it hurts, but nothing can keep you down, cool guy. You got me right here waiting for you, too." He felt new tears already forming, already slipping down across his face. He didn't bother moving to stop them. "And I'm not going anywhere." A tiny sob hiccuped out of him, his fingers tightening around Papyrus's hand. So you gotta wake up, okay?" He fought to keep his voice controlled, though it wavered anyway. "You know I'm not so good around the house without you. And who's gonna make me the best spaghetti in the world if you don't do it, right?" He tried to keep up the levity. It was what he always did, after all. Make jokes, lighten the mood, pretend things weren't as shitty as they really were. This was different, though. He couldn't keep that up for long when his little brother was in this condition, and he had no idea how much longer it might be before he woke up. What if he doesn't? The dark thought flitted across his mind briefly before he forced it away. He turned his head to press his face into the blanket, muffling the harsher sob that broke free of him. He stayed like that for a moment, his shoulders shaking, his free hand coming up to clutch at the side of his skull. There was no one to keep up appearances for right now, so he let himself cry. Please. And that was the first chapter of Hospital by Deep Doot Diz. You can check out the rest of the story through the link in the description. Like I said, there are cute and fun moments on the way after that. It's just got a bit of a dramatic start. Incidentally, the author also has a YouTube channel you can check out called Candy and Mayla. She and her girlfriend are doing Let's Plays, and they are absolutely adorable together, like it should be a crime. So please go check them out and tell them I sent you. They're both really nice, and I'm sure they'd love to talk to you about Undertale and Overwatch and The Sims and just all the games that they're playing. So go check them out. I'll see you next time. Unexpected is coming before the end of the week, I promise you can hold me to it. And then The Scientist. Sorry, I'm bad at time management. Meh.